morning, everyone. You're listening to Turtle Island News with Tracey Kennedy. Live, of course, turtleislandnews.info and Revolution Radio, Studio A. We have quite a topic. It's going to take me at least 2 shows because we have some events that have been happening on this continent that we need to deal with. So I'm going to start these topics off with prophecy and with some help, because we're going to be talking about the dog soldiers. So I brought you one. Osio. See that?
Osio.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing pretty good. I mean, hanging out, banging, doing everything else I got to do.
Awesome. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Chief Charles Two Dog, my partner in thought crime for many years now. We have discussed what happened when this land was first viewed by the new set of outsiders that have come. What has happened is obvious. We have to go back to a couple things, and I realize that most people don't know about the dog soldiers. So we're gonna come at this a couple ways today, because I would like Chief Charles Dudog, of course, to tell us about his vision. But we have to start with Tecumseh and then go to the Cheyenne warriors. And I think Thursday I'm going to leave that open for the other part of the story, because dog soldiers have been known all over this planet. Now, in 1805, Plains Indian in the Midwest were feeling the westward invasion by, of course, pioneers. Tecumseh, a member of the Shawnee tribe, used the growing worry of desperate tribes at this point to bring together into a confederacy with the common goal of saving their ancestral land. The dream of a separate Indian nation state would die, unfortunately, along with Tecumseh when he was killed, 1813. I have a movie up that I'm hoping you may have a chance to watch. Because in the spring of 1805, now you can help me with this name, Tudog. I know that you know this story. Is it Tens Watak? What?
Tinskanawa, I believe.
Okay.
Kanawi.
Tanawi?
Yeah.
Okay. It's close to that anyway. Shawnee, of course, fell into a trance so deep that those around him believed he was dead. When he finally stirred, this young prophet claimed he had met the master of life. His words. He told those who crowded around to listen that the Indians were in dire straits because they had adopted white culture and rejected all traditional ways, spiritual ways. For several years, his spiritual revival movement drew thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, of adherents from tribes across the Midwest. Now his older brother, Tecumseh, would harness the energies of that revival to create an unprecedented military and political confederacy of often antagonistic tribes, all committed to stopping the invasion. Now the brothers came closer than anyone since to creating an Indian nation that would exist this time alongside and separate from the United States. Now, the dream of an independent Indian state may have died at the Battle of the Thames, when Tecumseh was killed fighting alongside his British allies. There's a big story to that, but we'll just kind of let that go unless Two Dog wants to answer. But this great Shawnee warrior would live on as a potent symbol, Native pride, Indian identity. Now, from the award-winning PBS series American Experience comes We Shall Remain. It's on my page. The most ambitious primetime television series and media project on Native history ever been produced. We Shall Remain will present a multifaceted story of Native ingenuity, and I'm sorry I had to say it, and perseverance that spans 300 years. Now, the battle of European settlement in North America has been told countless times, by us even, but it's never from the perspective of the land's original inhabitants to go on TV. Now, we've done it, Two Dog and I. We talked about the papers and the readings of how we were spoken of when they first saw the people here, how beautiful we were, how tall we were. There's a little bit of man-bro love going on when they saw us. Totally different, the people on the ships, their teeth were all falling out, they didn't bathe, there was these strange animals swimming to shore because there are pestilence and rats. Now, we're going to take you into both myth and truth today. So, anything you want to add at this point, Two Dog?
Well, to be honest, his brother's name, the name that you said, meant loud noise. Like when he was a child, he actually shot one of his eyes out accidentally by a bow because he tried to hold up to Tecumseh, but he also got into a lot of depression, alcoholism, and he fell into a fire. And the leaders and the medicine people actually thought he was dead. And his eyes opened, and he said he had this vision where he went to the master of life. And you're right, you hit everything right on the nail. He become what people knew as the prophet, Tracey.
Thanks, Two Dog. It's wonderful because we have been introducing you to these topics for at least 6 years now. I was surprised to see that going through our archives, and I'm like, wow, have we been doing this for this long? Now, there have been some events happening across Turtle Island. We've talked about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and children.
Yes.
People just disappearing. We've talked about the child trafficking, the human trafficking that's going on, especially between Canada and United States, although our children have been shipped everywhere on this planet. And what's happening with Child Protective Services, and I use that word, and I'm trying not to swear because it's on the tip of my tongue right now, get paid more per child if they're Native. This happens in Canada, happens in the United States as well. And both of those countries pay when children are shipped out to be adopted further away. Mm-hmm. Especially in other countries. Now, we've talked about that. Kids aren't just taken from town to town. It's bad enough they're taken off the res, sometimes with absolutely no reason, or you'll find out that the same person has called for 10 kids, and none of these kids are from traumatic homes. The home problem is their parents are poor, so they can't afford to go to court to battle for their children back. Now, what's been happening, and I've seen 12 reports. 12 for me means we got to talk about this, and this is why I brought in Two Dog today. 12 reports of something that should not exist. The dog soldiers. Now, if you don't mind, Two Dog, I'd like to tell them what the dog soldiers are. Just the story.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Please do.
Just the story, not the myth. This is the history of the bravest, most noble warriors that ever lived. I think bar none. No one but their people will ever know if they truly were wiped out, as the U.S. Army claimed they were in the 1860s. So this is not just one battle here. Now, I have an article on my page again. You can look up more stuff if you like to, with pictures. There's pictures too. It's by Richard S. Grimes. It's taken from several accounts and the Dog Soldier Societies of the Plains. Manitoka, specifically. Now, what we're going to provide is detailed information on military societies of the Plains nations, including regalia, fighting tactics, history, traditions, ceremonies. I've also added sidebars with interesting facts, notations. These are the modern Spartans, as they were called. Although there are so many similarities between the Spartans and the dog soldiers that you'll see it too. Now, this is the ascent of the Cheyenne dog soldiers. Now, they give a date, 1838, 1869. But the myth, the stories of these go back thousands and thousands of years just on this continent, that they would appear, that these men didn't need to be trained, that they knew what to do, always. Now, these awesome warriors were armed to the teeth, revolvers at that time, bows, but they always seemed to show up with the latest weaponry. Now, realize that the Plains Indians were fairly peaceful by the 1800s until they got pushed. So these warriors, proud, haughty, defiant, as should become those who would grant favors, not beg them. These were braves. These are the people that the word comes from. Now, with these words, an Ohio reporter covering the critical negotiations at Medicine Lodge Creek in Kansas described the arrival of these 500 Cheyenne dog soldiers. Their proud arrival at treaty grounds, some 70 miles south of Fort Larned, left a lasting impression on all of those who witnessed their entrance. As the dog soldiers came within sight of the camp, they made chilling war cries, fired their rifles into the air. Their ponies whipped through the high weeds. They brandished their feather lances, their rifles high over their heads as they rode into the lodge circles. A young British journalist who would later would gain world renown for his adventures in Africa, accompanied the United States Army to Medicine Lodge Creek as war correspondents for the St. Louis Daily, a Missouri Democrat, if you need to know that. He was impressed with the entry of the dog soldiers, as was fellow journalists. Stanley acknowledged the vaulted Kiowa the terrible Comanche. The what do we call it? The warriors of the Arapaho, I think that's the word.
Arapaho.
Oh, jeez, I'm an idiot. Okay, Arapaho. Thank you, my brother. Paled before these guys, the scourge of the plain. A scout and buffalo hunter, who was another witness to these, was in a state of awe as he watched these warriors, these soldiers, armed with all their equipment, adored with all their regalia, battle, who seemed to have just raised out of the earth. Many of the stories of them coming to the fort didn't just talk about them arriving, it talked about them appearing like out of smoke. There are some stories that say literally out of smoke these men arrived. Now, of course, many survived, or at least survived. This was militant posturing to create a profound impression as possible, to inspire everyone deeply. Whether they appeared or they arrived, everyone saw something and were in awe of this. No matter how many guns they had, no matter how many cannons they had, no matter how much this land wanted. Now, these dog soldiers never approached the political, the military power that they once had. They remained revered, though, by other Cheyenne. They are still held in respect by all the nations on this continent right now. Young Cheyenne are still recruited into this clan. During the 20th century, dog soldiers have served with the United States military, 2 world wars, conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, Persian Gulf region, and they say they are dog soldiers. Now, the rise of the dog soldiers demonstrated the dynamics of change amongst the Cheyenne and their ability to respond to a national crisis. The defeat at Summit Springs ended their prominence as a major force in opposition to the United States. The expansion, people like to call it, across the Great Plains, but this was theft, this was rape, this was murder. Now, as Peter Powell succinctly states, with the defeat, the power of the dogmen all but disappeared, blown away like a wind blows the buffalo grass. The people, Powell continued, never forgot their bravery. Now, according to Stanley, the dog soldiers remained alert, imposing throughout the treaty negotiations, although they did not take part. They sat astride their ponies, watching with fierce eyes every movement that was going on, heads adorned with nodding plumes, their faces painted red, blue, black, yellow. They present in my mind the safeguard of a nation, the forlorn hope of peoples. In this band, haughty, obstinate, are to be found the best representative of the American people, the people of Turtle Island, who are still in existence. So he concluded that the dog soldiers were modern Spartans who knew how to die, but not how to be led into captivity. Now, the treaty talks between the Southern Plains Indian Nations and the United States began at this camp of the federal commissioners. Thousands of Southern Cheyenne, Arapaho, Comanches, Apaches met with the government representatives to discuss a treaty that would restrict Indian movement north of Arkansas River. In return, the whites would be forbidden from hunting south of Arkansas. The reserved area would be protected as the exclusive domain of the Indians as long as the buffalo herds roamed in the southern plains. There were both positive and negative aspects to this treaty. However, even had the treaty finally favored the Indian interests, the Cheyenne present would have refrained from immediately signing this thing. Only 150 Cheyenne were in attendance. They were just chiefs. The majority of the southern Cheyenne remained camped further to the west in the Cimarron River. Do you know this place too, Doug?
Cimarron, I think it is.
Cimarron, thank you. Now, in the camp were the Dog Soldiers, the military elite of the Cheyenne people. I think they say it Chichitza? I think so. Now, the Cheyenne leaders at Medicine Lodge Creek would not sign the treaty until the Dog Soldiers considered the matter and gave their approval. The treaty was ratified by the Cheyenne only when the Dog Soldier leaders came forward to sign their names. Journalistic accounts considered the Dog Soldiers may have been embellished with a dramatic, romantic flair, but they illustrated the vivid impressions left upon whites who had witnessed the intimidating presence of these Cheyenne warriors. But the articles Chief Two Dog and I talked about years ago said that this was the impression that Native men gave. They were taller than most Europeans at the time. The loss of stature had to do with 40 years of starvation. But moving on, significantly, the Dog Soldiers displayed what Cheyenne considered the ultimate expression of their manhood, tribal identity. So it's only fitting that at a Medicine Lodge talks, the members of this fraternal society, just guys, asserted their potency to the alien people who were threatening the Cheyenne existence. The warriors represented more than simply a means of defense. They had transcended their original responsibility and duty as a soldier society, raised to a position of military and political dominance amongst all the people, but the Cheyenne people specifically. Now, there's more to this article, but I want to give Chief Two Dog a chance to say something and me to go get some tea. Two Dog?
Ski. One thing about the Cheyenne Dog Soldiers and Dog Soldiers in general, it's kind of like an oath that they took to protect the land, to protect the people. Basic, what they would do sometimes would be like staking their self to the land, or staking their self to a tree, or to the land. Stake yourself down. In other words, if I die here, I die here. In other words, I will not move. In other words, they would stand in a lot of times to allow the people in general, if they have to, the military is coming, they would stake themselves down and be in the way of the military where the people can move if they have to. In other words, they were a frontline defense that says, if you come here, you'll have to come over me, because I will not bow down. Basic. In other words, Yeah, I could see the Spartan thing. Yes, I could. It's a blood oath in a lot of ways as a protection of the people. Like I said, we belong to the mother. Mother doesn't belong to us, but we would stake ourselves to the ground that says, this is where I fight or die. It's that for the people. That's the main point in this whole deal, in many ways, is that I fight here. I back up not. And if I die, then I die good. It's a good day to die.
You know, what Chief Two Dog was saying is so important because we have stories. Some would say myths, but stories of warriors like this. They have very similar aspects to them. As a matter of fact, and I'm going to do this one day, even the colors that they wear, the headdresses that they wear, you can see this all over the world. You can talk about the jaguar warriors, South America. These dog soldiers are representative of an ancient fraternity. They're usually like, what would we even call them? Warriors, yes, obviously. Soldiers, yes, obviously. But mystics as well. That they study the arts of camouflage and herbs and medicine. That they are usually medicine people that appear. I'll tell you more about that in the second hour. So, thank you so much to Doug. Did you get a chance to talk about the dream you've had? The vision?
If you would like for me to, I'll say it now, Trey.
Please. Because it kind of goes with the rest of the story.
Well, we had a meeting between the Western Lenape and the Mari people. And a few days after they left, I had a dream. And in this dream, I was outside in front of my house. And there was the moon there and a lot of stars, but it was dark, real dark. And then like a flash of light, almost blinding, big light, the whole world lit up. Then when I looked up to the east side, there was an indigenous spirit there. And this spirit was smiling. He's smiling, looking right at me. Then he put his arm out with his finger, and he went around the whole circle, in a circle, all the way around, northeast, south, west, all the direction. And when he did that, he put his hand down. He was still smiling at me. You could see him bend down. And then when he bent back up, he looked at me, still smiling, had beads in his hand, and it was like he was handing the beads to me, Trace. That was the vision.
Thank you to Doug. Now, when we talk about the dog soldier, we have to go to everything I've said to you before this. Dog, God, Anu, the old ones, the ancient ones. All of this is a part of the same story because we have warriors who refuse to be captured all over the world. They fight with similar ways. They chain themselves to each other. They drive a stake into the ground. They tie themselves to a tree. They will not be taken, they fight to the death. And they always have a similar aspect to them. And they appear when we need them the most. This story carries on all over. Now, this treaty. The power and necessity of military societies is especially evident in times of major armed conflicts, of course. They forbade the individualistic pursuit of glory. All Cayenne military action had to be sanctioned by war leaders. Despite this, many young men from different societies would try to leave, would go out on an independent excursion against the enemy. For this reason, soldier societies would conduct a police watch, and it was quite an accomplishment for a warrior to avoid detection, to escape camps. Now, they also had to be coordinated between individuals and military societies on camp duty in order to be successful. In addition, there was a perceived need to have the camps policed to ensure compliance with all the Cheyenne demands for self-control. These were not a bunch of drunken military guys, and this happens all over the world. It was strict, this moral code. You fail it, you die, or they beat you really, really badly, or they kill you. One or the other. These warriors have existed throughout time and space, I think. Now, amongst the Cheyenne, in the Plains Nations, there was a need for officialdom, a sanctioned authority, bodies that could hold in check unrestrained members, and it would do so without being too coercive, too dictatorial, depending. Military societies, fraternal warrior clubs were sanctioned by the Cayenne government structure to counter the actions of individuals who threatened communal welfare. Now, one example of a security enforcement that occurred June 1876 when some Cheyenne joined the Lakota Sioux on the Little Bighorn to form a massive village. The war leaders of the Cheyenne soldier societies there were willing to wait and see if the white soldiers attacked them. These authorities ordered the young Cheyenne men to stay put, leave the soldiers alone, unless they attacked. The military societies worked all day and night, patrolling the Little Bighorn on both banks to make sure the young men did not creep out to be the first to fight in the approaching cavalrymen. Now, this is an example of a case where insistence on the welfare of the whole people would supersede the desire of the young men seeking to obtain status. Now, the role of these soldier societies to this day is honored in the Cheyenne oral history, the folklore, and all native peoples seem to have a branch of these special soldiers. Now, according to tradition, in the past, the bands of Cheyenne people lived in disorder, chaos. It's the story that we've told and had retold and retold and retold all over the world. Now, there was chronic theft and murder amongst the members. To find a solution to these social problems, Sweet Medicine, the Cheyenne central cultural hero, ventured into the heart of the Black Hills country. When he reached the sacred mountain, known by the Cheyenne as Vows, today's Bear Boot, he encountered a group of old men and old women. These elders instructed Sweet Medicine on how to solve the problem of the Cheyenne anarchy. He was told to implement good government by forming a council of 44, there's that number again, chiefs, and by organizing military societies to maintain a good system of police and military protection. Both the Cheyenne civil councils and the Cheyenne military organizations were, as the story suggests, structured on the basis of tradition and protocol. Very, very structured. So, no, we were not just running around here amok. There were eventually 6 military societies. The Foxmen, or the Kit Foxmen, the Red Shields, the Crazy Dogs, the Crooked Lance Society, known as ethno-historian George Grinnell as the Elks, the Bowmen, or the Bowstring Men, the Wolf Warriors, and the Dogmen, or Dog Soldiers. Yes, there's a Fox Men too.
Oh.
Through this list contains 7 names. Many scholars accept the view of George Bird Grinnell and his chief informant, George Bent, that the Bowstring Men and the Wolf Warriors are the same society. How that, we don't know for sure. Now, the Bowstrings were southern Cayenne. This we know, Cheyenne. While the Crazy Dogs were found exclusively in the north of Cheyenne North. Now, most of the militant and elite societies of all of this, it is agreed on, were the Dog Soldiers. And through the last group to emerge, it became the most important, rising in unique prominence, power. The ascension of this society by the mid-1850s demonstrated the ability of the Cheyenne to respond to a national crisis when the United States poured into the homeland. The Dog Soldiers evolved into a political and military juggernaut in response to this assault. Now, soldier societies provided martial training, socialization, preservation of traditional ideas amongst men who joined these groups. Each Cheyenne fraternal organization had its sacred symbols, its decorations, its own dances, its own songs. This made members of each club different from those of other groups, as distinct from Cheyenne society as a whole. The Red Shield soldiers, interestingly enough, who, as a side note, remind me a lot of the Zulu warriors. Same red shield, so they're Mars. These soldiers carried red shields that had the tail of a bison hanging from the base. If you go through my page, turtleislandnews.info, you will see the Zulus doing the exact same thing, although they don't have a bison. But wolf soldiers were well known, again, for their military prowess, also their elaborate social gatherings, which were complete with very boisterous, noisy songs, beautiful, incredible dances, and the sparkling and the varied colors of their outfit. Our men like to dress up too. See, we did not dress our men funny like we do now. Guys this was flirting. But Crooked Lance Society members wrapped their lances in otter skins, while each member of the Dog Soldiers wore on his chest a whistle made of the bone of a bird. 4 of the bravest Dog Soldiers were then chosen to wear sashes of tanned skins called the dog ropes into battle. Do you want to jump in, Dog, or should I keep going?
Go ahead, you're doing fine.
Okay.
But yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Historical note. Attached to each dog rope was a picket pin that's used to tether horses. The pin was driven into the ground as a mark of resolve. I will not move. During combat, when a dog soldier was staked to the ground in order to cover the retreat of his companions, he was required to remain there even if death was a consequence. The dogman would pull the pin from the ground only if all of his companions reached safety, or another dog soldier released him from his duty. They would not move for any other reason. The societies illustrated the, yes, competitive nature of warfare. Although, in the Mohawk have a game. Only men play this game for reasons that will become obvious in a minute. They tie their ankles together and they kick each other until someone says uncle. This game can go on all day.
I've played it.
To dog. Did you really?
Yeah.
So you see how they are. They're playing, but they play until someone gets hurt. Games usually end up with someone really hurt, but they don't mind. Now this is fierce. These contests are fierce, and they exist between various Cheyenne military organizations. Each society formed its own war parties, tried to exceed the military accomplishments of rival societies. So, Wooden Leg, who was a 17-year-old warrior who helped defeat Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer's command at Little Bighorn, recalled that the warrior societies competed with each other for effectiveness in war, in status within the community. If an enemy party was small in number, the soldier leads only selected a few of certain members of the society to do the fighting. Now, if this appointed segment of our fighters did well, they were acclaimed. If they did not, especially if other warriors had to go to their assistance, the original combatants were discredited. So theoretically, the societies were to maintain order without resorting to crushing a person's individualism through the extensive punishment. However, on occasion, the members resorted to extreme measures to maintain discipline. That was the one thing they would not abide. You could do a lot of things, but not break ranks. Now, Colonel Richard Dodge observed the duties of the dog soldiers when it was their turn to police the camp. The colonel noted that they supplied the guards for the camp, designate the hunting parties, the ground they were to work over, then selected the keen-eyed hunters who are to go in advance. A violation of the dog soldier rules is at once met with a beating. Also, historical note, while violations were generally at an individual level, there were occasions when entire bodies chose to conform to the mandates of the soldiers. Cheyenne bands were occasionally summoned by the leaders to meet at a central location in preparation for war or a communal hunt, for instance. Now, in one instance, Cheyenne were sent to locate a Pawnee camp that was attacked. The soldier societies leading the raid instructed the scouts to kill any enemies found along the way who were alert, or who might alert the Pawnee camp of the impending attack. The Cheyenne wolves, so scouts, the wolves were scouts in general. They came across one Pawnee who stood his ground, wounded one Cheyenne, drove the rest away. As they're returning to the main camp, the wolves decided not to tell the members of their soldier society that they had been beaten by one Pawnee. A wounded scout named Wolf Mule, however, unfolded under questioning by members of the society and confessed. The soldiers then whipped the other scouts with pony squirts. That's their tail, right?
Yeah.
Okay. They did not harm the informer, though, so the band would occasionally dawdle along the way. A band of Shawnee once refused to move camp quickly to answer a summons. The group was in a safe area with ample game, so the members decided to enjoy the surroundings before moving to the main tribal location. After a few days, they were suddenly pounced on by overwhelming force of the dog soldiers. The soldiers went directly to the women and ordered the women to pack right now. Those who did not move quickly were beaten with a rod. Within hours, the camp was packed. The children, and the women and children, who bore the duty of packing, followed the soldiers to the new location. The lovers, the husbands, the fathers could do absolutely nothing but follow. And apparently there's a bit of pouting going on. Now the dog men thwarted this temporary rebellion. The guilty suffered humiliation in front of the rest of the tribe, and the Cheyenne order and the dog soldiers' authority were again reestablished. So know that there was a lot of structure going on here, especially with these people. So as the examples that I've told you indicate, the dog soldiers. Now I'm going to try to say their name. Hotamintanio? Hotamintanio? Is that
That's
it?
close.
Tell me.
I think, and then, what? Say that again, because I'm not Cheyenne. It's hard for me to.
Okay. Hotamini Tanio.
Oh, yeah, you got it.
Okay. Thank you. Asserted their dominance in many areas, believe it or not. They and the members of the other soldier clubs maintain order. Civil, military spheres of the Cheyenne life. So the Cheyenne life sounds very much like Spartans. So I think most people will remember Barb talking about the ancient societies in South America, who too had a very structured, almost military kind of hierarchy. So no, we were not all running around naked and, just having fun. The order was established and it was strictly adhered to. Now, however, there have been traditional distinctions between civil and military authority amongst the Cheyenne. Now, this tradition is reflected in the story of Sweet Medicines, creating a council, again, of 44 chiefs that were distinct from soldier societies. The ascension of the dog soldiers marked a breakdown of the separation between civil and military elements of Cheyenne society. Now the dog soldiers evolved into this political military power as the United States poured into the Cheyenne homeland mid-1800. As their right in the times of conflict, military societies gained more control over the nation since its total mobilization was required to counter the assault. The military crisis deepened. The soldier societies responded by becoming more assertive. As their influence increased, the societies at times became arbitrary, dictatorial in their relationship with civil leadership communities. They took control and told people what to do, and people needed to listen, but they were in danger at the time. particular, though, they came to exercise enormous influence, enormous power. The rise of the dog soldiers was not originally inspired by some monumentous event, believe it or not, in Cheyenne history. Instead, their ascent began with a sordid incident years earlier that freed them from many of the constraints of Cheyenne tradition, protocol. Early in the winter 1838, the dog soldier leader, Porcupine Bear, and a few of his warriors were traveling from camp to camp to recruit other societies to join them in a raid against the Kiowas. One village located on the South Platte River in Wyoming just obtained whiskey for the first time, and again from American Fur Company, a post at Fort William, the future Fort Laramie. Now, according to Greenville Dodge, the whole camp went to drinking that night. Porcupine Bear and his men actually became drunk during the celebration. His two cousins, Little Creek and Around, became embroiled in a brawl. Around, and that's his name, getting beaten, begged Porcupine Bear to help him. Porcupine Bear paid no attention. He sat alone in the corner of a lodge, singing to himself in a low voice. Very drunk. He was singing dog soldier songs. Presently, the Little Creek rolled on top of Around, drawing a knife, raised his arm to strike. At that moment, Porcupine Bear leapt in a sudden rage, springing upon Little Creek. He wrenched the knife from his hand, stabbed him 2 or 3 times, then forced the knife into Around's hand, standing over him, told him to finish him off. For this crime, Porcupine Bear and his followers were deemed outlaws by the entire tribe. They were forbidden to camp with other Cheyenne, banned from all national functions, ostracized from society. Porcupine Bear and his men could only set up lodge near a village or a mile or 2 from it. The Dog Soldier Society in general was disgraced. And it was...
That shows you exactly what white man's alcohol actually could do.
Yes.
As far as mess up somebody's whole structure.
Exactly. And it happened the first time they tried it. And these were men of honor, and they were not playing, when it came to their punishment of them because of it. So they were relieved of any future police responsibility because of this incident. Porcupine Bear and his warriors still kept contact, of course, with other Cheyenne camps and fought on their behalf when needed. In a battle at Wolf Creek with Comanches and Kiowa, his men counted first coup. Porcupine Bear singularly killed 12 Kiowas. However, the Dogmen were outlaws. And we'll continue with this. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Turtle Island News with Tracey Kennedy. Of course, today we are lucky enough to be joined by Chief Charles Tudog. Welcome back, Tudog.
Skate for still having me. And
I'm
Tracey,
glad you're here.
If you allow me for a minute.
Please.
Of course, you've interviewed me on my first time with the Hard Drum at one time.
That's right.
You know my background from the get-go.
I do.
If you think about it, in the burial ground when I was 12, when the 4 jumped me and pretty much left me for dead, and the elder black man took me 6 months to get back on my feet. For standing for the ones that got washed up and the bones that come out as far as the burial ground. I refused to back away from that. So in a way, I know that I know the system. You know, to stand your ground for what you know. You don't you don't back up. You're there. You either you fight, die, or you know. So I understand this system.
I do too, and that's why I thought it'd be perfect for you to come on when I talk about this, because sometimes it can sound really dry when I'm just reading facts, but we have to realize what these people are doing. When you put your stake in the ground, when you stand your ground, that's where comes from. That's where the term comes from. These
I've
men,
done it more than once.
yeah, who stand their ground. And again, you know the story of what alcohol does. It's horrible. It is a poison. That's why you act like an idiot with it. Not you, of course, too, Doug, but I mean people in general.
You know, when I was younger, I had that problem.
It's
now,
most of us. Anyone who from
36
here,
years sober now, so that's a good deal. But
I got about
it
12
makes
hours.
You do some of the most, it makes you do things you would not do.
It's true. Yeah, I'm working on my 12th hour right now. But,
Congrats.
you know. Don't praise me. I'm ridiculous. Okay, so. Alienation from a camp. Men were considered outlaws and could bison counts and conditions of Cheyenne were abject want of food for half the year without joining bison hunts. So being not being allowed to hunt with a group was a big deal. This alienation from a main camp, instead of chastising the warriors, led the dog soldiers' independence. Instead of being under the influence of all traditional band chiefs, dog soldiers were now governed by their own band chiefs, all of whom were ward leaders. So men became dog soldiers who did so with the understanding that they would have to move their families and take up residency among the dogs, the soldiers. Instead of chastising the warriors, their alienation from the maiden camp led their dog soldier society to become fiercely independent from the rest of the Cheyenne bands. It was described as an extraordinary feature that endowed the dog society a unique cohesiveness that bonded them and gave rise to the possibility of governmental formation of their own. Now, the distinction between being a military society and being a band of the Cheyenne became blurred as dog soldiers became a separate division of the Cheyenne people. Now, despite their alienation, the defiant and elite dog soldiers had no trouble attracting young warriors, even though their life was much harder because they were not allowed to hunt with the rest of the societies. You know, that's a big deal in come winter. So you needed to be tough, really, really tough. Now, it's noted in a really thoughtful study of the Cheyenne military societies that after the banishment, recruitment into the society snowballed until it comprised half of the fighting force of the tribe. The dog soldiers lured the most militant of warriors into their ranks, for their members would not give 1 inch to accommodate the whites. They wouldn't, because they have offered an alternative to the failed peace policies of civil leaders who were unable to prevent encroachment on their territory. So by 1850s, the Cheyenne, like other and most Plains tribes, were entering in a state of national crisis. A few far-sighted white people predicted the coming catastrophe awaiting the tribes, such as the Cheyenne. Thomas Brokenhand Fitzpatrick was a veteran plainsman who represented the Cheyenne and the Arapaho as their agent. He became deeply concerned for the welfare of these people when he noticed the thinning out of their massive southern bison herds. In 1853, Fitzpatrick addressed the Bureau of Indian Affairs on the severity of the situation. He claimed that, as startling as it may appear, the Cheyenne and Arapaho, many of the Sioux, were actually starving. The agent noticed the drastic decrease in bison accounts and the traditions of the Cheyenne, who were in want of food half the year without the bison. So other warnings came from Indian traders, like not a trader, they do the trading, William Bent. He contacted the Bureau in 1859, stressing the danger of allowing gold seekers to migrate into the mountain regions of Colorado. Bent believed that the intruders were disrupting the winter domain of the Cheyenne. So again, historical note, a smoldering passion for revenge agitates people. And Bent warned, perpetually formulated by failure to find food, the encircling encroachment of the white people, and the exacerbation and the sense of decay in the impending extinction which they are surrounded by. John Moore analyzed the rise of the dog soldiers as part of a military imperative that existed amongst the Cheyenne, 1860s, 1870s. The dogmen represented a reorganization of the Cheyenne society, geographical movement, and a strong position in a political question. In a disastering or horrifically changing world, which only got worse, as we see. Now, the dog soldiers attracted all of those who were irrevocably hostile to the encroachments, those who chose war as the only means to repulse this invasion of Indian country. And I know this sounds harsh, but they were fighting for their lives.
Can I help you with that?
Please.
Just a sec.
Please.
With this, Tracey, let me see if I could for our listeners can understand this deal.
Please.
Okay, within the same instance, say you're used to doing and feeding your family this way, say the buffalo or whatever, and within this encroachment that keeps coming, and your grocery store is getting kind of depleted because they're taking it away from you, and then you got to feed your child by killing your house pet as far as your family dog. Thus, dog soldier.
Yes, when you're starving.
You're starving and you have to feed your children a dog because you can't get what you normally have because they're killing your whole food source.
Yeah.
On this encroachment.
Exactly. And what we were saying on Sunday with Patty, when you're pushed and your family, your husband, your wife, your children are looking at you hungry, you fight.
You do what you got to do.
You do what you got to do. You not only fight, you want to fight so much that their DNA will remember what you've done. So you turn around and force these people back. I understand what happens, how this happens, so I know for a fact that I am no better than the worst of us, because if I had to protect my son, war paid. Crap.
Well, anybody, that knows me, if I have to protect my daughter, I'm going to protect her till there is nothing left of me.
Yeah,
Period.
I'm going to go full dark side. So, this is when they rose. And, if we go through history, the dog soldiers always rise at this time. And even the councils, the 7 or the 6, depending on who you want to listen to, seem to be the exact same rise that happens during times of stress worldwide. Now, the restless and warlike elements of the Brule, the Oglala Lakotas, were attracted by the defiant and obstinate nature of the dog soldiers, vice versa. Together, the Comanche, their Arapaho associates, the Lakotas, would often form an informal alliance, 1860s, 1870s, to bar the Euro-American settlement and to fight the United States military on the central and northern plains. The Cheyenne warriors also rode with the Arapahoes, the Kiowas, and the Comanches, southern plains, to resist the intrusion of the whites into their hunting grounds as well. There were, while most Cheyenne continued to honor the civil chiefs for their wisdom and senior standing in society, the young warriors gravitated towards the militant factions, the dog soldiers, for these were men of direct action. They preferred the leaders of the Haudenosaunee over the leaders who advocated peace. You got the young man's blood up. This always seems to be what happens. Now, even though there were still much sentiment for it amongst the northern and the southern Cheyenne, Aldridge Gerry, a rancher and representative of the United States Commissioner of Indian Affairs, was friendly, believe it or not, towards the Cheyenne, believed that the increasing numbers of warriors were determined to sweep the plate and the country as far as they could of settlers. He noted that the civil leaders were becoming increasingly powerless because the young men could not be controlled. Gerry witnessed an unusual example of the young men's militancy, 1863. In the year, the dog soldiers forbade one of their principal leaders, Bull Bear, from attending a Southern Cheyenne Treaty Council with Gerry. The dog soldiers feared that Bull Bear would be swayed by the influence of the peace chiefs there. They were determined to prevent the secession of more of the Republican River and the Smoky Hill River County through the signing of yet another disastrous treaty like that made at Fort Wise, Colorado, just 2 years before. Now, many of the observers during that time believed that the dog soldiers had taken control of the Cheyenne, southern ones specifically, while the civil chiefs attempted to carry out their traditional authority. White officials steadfastly or steadily recognized these men Haudenosaunee as the main source of power for all the Cheyenne. Now, another historical note. Traditional governor John Evans, Colorado, 1865, testified to Congress that the dog soldiers took control of the tribe, mainly out of the hands of the chiefs. Civil chiefs such as Black Kettle, White Antelope, Spotted Horse could not restrain the dogs from warrior activity, even after the Council of Chiefs had agreed on peace. For this vigilante committee, the dog soldiers, managed the tribe instead of the chiefs by that point. The Army Scout and the interpreter, Ben Clark, maintained that the dog soldiers enjoyed superiority over all the other Cheyenne bands. Dog soldiers, because of their numbers, the prestige of their warrior, ruled the tribe. When the dog soldiers wanted war, the whole tribe warred. Now, George Bent, son of Trader William Bent, and Owl Woman, his Cheyenne wife, also contended that the dog soldiers were wild, reckless, impossible to control. However, he credited them with being excellent raiders, premier warriors, and during the 1860s, the dog soldiers struck rail stations, wagon trains, settlements, temporarily held off the expansion by themselves into Cheyenne territory. Unfortunately, though, because their activities, as well as those of other soldier societies, the peaceful Cheyenne became the target of all the traditional militias, the American Army, who were looking for a soft target. You guys know what that means military-wise. They wanted the easy kill. They weren't getting it from these boys. Now, the most tragic case of this came with the slaughter of the peace chief, Black Kettle's people, at Sand Creek, Colorado, November 1864. Oh. A slaughter, a massacre.
Exactly.
Now, the destruction of Black Kettle's village had two big impacts on warfare. First, other warrior societies, other than the dog soldiers, such as the Elks and the Foxes and the Bowstrings, became alienated from the civil chiefs and their peace efforts. They would increasingly ride out, fight as unrestricted, autonomous bands. Second, many Cheyenne became convinced that when fighting the United States, they needed to be constantly prepared for war. Earlier decades, Cheyenne wars had been usually with other Plains people, and it was not to the death. These affairs were a seasonal activity, believe it or not. It sounded lighter to talk, to read about these things. Now, war parties generally fought in warmer weather, ceased their martial activity during winter months, because people had enough to worry about. It's winter. You need to eat. You need to rest. But the surprise attack on the encampment of Sand Creek in the dead of winter changed all of this. It was basically, for all people who experience cold, rude to fight in the winter, to attack in the winter.
And let me add this.
Please.
In the support of the dog soldier, too, let me add this.
Please.
Black Kettle went into peace talks with Shemington and the bloodless, well, they had the bloodless third, what they called the bloodless third. Mm. And Black Kettle let them know that his band was a peaceful band. They even gave him an American flag to wave over, in the middle of his lot, in the middle of his village.
Wow.
To let the soldiers know that they were a peaceful band. Okay? Shivington stated these words: "In the name of God, we must annihilate these people right down to the children nits make of lice." Wouldn't that make the Warrior Society get a little more angry after that Sand Creek massacre actually happened?
Yeah, and they also couldn't believe that any people on this planet would actually attack during winter. This is what was said. So, in the words of a study by John H. Moore, Cheyenne society was at that moment transformed into a warrior society. Thus, military leaders came to the forefront of all the hierarchy. Before there were peace chiefs, there were different clans. There was the mothers. Like in most traditional societies, the mothers were, that ended at this event. The dog soldiers set a trend of soldier societies maintaining permanent residence in camp, rather than being appointed by civil leadership on a seasonal basis, which was the way of the people. Pretty much everybody. Now, military leaders were now firmly in control of the Cheyenne hierarchy. The warriors who fought as members or associates of the dog soldiers were in the Cheyenne nations their only hope of repelling this invasion. One such warrior was Roman Nose.
Roman Nose.
Yes, Roman Nose. Wakeny, right? Arch Nose. Roman Nose was a northern Cheyenne who had distinguished himself amongst his people to such a high degree that United States military misidentified him as the chief of the Cheyenne nation. Roman Nose was not a chief at all, but an influential member of the Crooked Lance Warrior Society. He was considered to be a superb specimen of Cheyenne manhood. He was known by George Bent, who was also a member of the society. Bent described Roman Nose as a man of fine character, quiet, self-contained. At the same time, Roman Nose was a dangerous fighter who counted many coups, gained great prestige in high status in the Cheyenne society. Now, according to Bent, all the Cheyenne, both men and women, held him in highest esteem. The Roman Nose established himself as a warrior following the Sand Creek Massacre. To avenge the deaths of the Indian women and the children at Sand Creek, an allied force of Cheyenne, Arapahoes, Lakotas began in early part of 1865 to lay waste to 400 miles of settlement. And when I say lay waste, they burned ranches, farms, telegraph offices, drove off cattle. Denver was cut off from supplies, virtually besieged. Roman Nose had come south to participate in the raids, rode with the dog soldiers, leading retaliatory strikes all along the north and south Platte rivers, early part of 1865. The dog soldiers and Roman Nose, his own followers, created such destruction on Smoky Hill Road that it disrupted all travel through Kansas to Colorado. These boys weren't playing. So the government demanded that the Cheyenne cease the raid or face extermination. So the peace parley between the dog soldiers and the United States was arranged for April 67 at a Pawnee fort outside of Fort Laramie, I think, Kansas. Major Gen... No, not Laramie.
Okay.
Laird. I think it might have become Laramie later. Okay, so General Winfield Hancock refused to talk with the Cheyenne until Roman Nose personally conferred with him. During the course of the negotiations, Hancock moved his headquarters close to the Cheyenne lodges. This angered Roman Nose. And given the recent memory of Sand Creek Massacre, the Cheyenne constantly feared for the safety of the women and children. Roman Nose informed Hancock that the warriors were not afraid of his soldiers, and he bitingly remarked that Hancock's men looked just like those who had butchered the women and children at Sand Creek. Hancock, in turn, became alarmed when the women and children left the village, claiming that this might indicate the Cheyenne were preparing for a fight. Hancock's response was to destroy the village. This only created more anger between the Dog Soldiers and the United States. He got scared and attacked the girls and the kids. So, September 17th, 1868, Romanos was killed while riding with the Cheyenne Dog Soldiers, the Sioux, and the Arapaho warriors in an assault on a party of civilian scouts besieged on a small island of Ackery Branch, Republican River in western Colorado. Anyway, the scouts, under the command of Colonel George A. Forsyth, I'm sure we've talked about him before. His name sounds familiar. He shot Romanos in the back as he passed by their defense lines. His companion dragged him to safety, but he died. The Dog Soldiers lost a great hero and a patriot for the cause of freedom. Now, despite several military setbacks, the Dog Soldiers continued to clash openly with the Cheyenne peace advocates. 1869, the most influential proponent of compromise, a southern Cheyenne chief named Little Robe, felt that the militant Dog Soldiers were detrimental to the welfare of the Cheyenne people. He banished them from his camp. Little Robe was not a coward, but a civil leader, and he felt it was his duty to pursue peace, as most of the civil leaders did, and try to preserve lives. He, like most of the peace chiefs in the southern Cheyenne, were realists and saw the futility of resisting the western movement of the settlers, because they kept coming and coming and coming. He believed that the future of the Cheyenne rested on their ability to coexist peacefully in the same country with citizens of the U.S. In 1874, this is during the Red River War, the Dog Soldiers quarreled with Little Robe once again. The chief wanted to move his camp to the safe confines of Darlington, so this is Cheyenne Arapaho Indian Nation or Agency in Oklahoma Indian Territory. The Dog Soldiers voiced their opposition to this and shot his horses. So during the period of 1865 and 1877, the Cheyenne were in continual conflict with the United States military. By the latter 1860s, the tide was slowly turning against the Cheyenne Nation, as the army gradually wore down the Indian resistance. You only see so many of your kids die in the winter. You lose heart. And in the early 1869, that year, Cheyenne Dog Soldiers inflicted severe punishment on the Kansas frontier. This was partly in retaliation for the attack of George Custer and the 7th Cavalry on Black Kettle's village, and another attack in the Washita River Indian Territory, November 1868. Now, during this assault on this peaceful Cheyenne encampment, Black Kettle and his wife were killed. Over 100 Cheyenne, mostly women and children, were killed, and a few of the youngest ones taken prisoner. The Dog Soldiers also raided the frontier in response to another attack by Major Eugene A. Carr, and 7 troops of the 5th Cavalry, so William F. Wild Bill Cody, against a dog soldier hunting camp, Republican River, in May 1869. Now, throughout the rest of May and June of that year, the Dog Soldiers, led by Tall Bull and White Horse, attacked white settlements in Jewell County, Kansas, and along the Solomon River in that state. They were aided by their Lakota allies and by Whistler of the Oglala and Two Strikes and his Brule. I don't know those people. Do you know those people?
Yeah, Brule.
Okay.
Brule. They part of the Sioux.
Oh, okay. So these raiders burnt farmhouses, stole horses, mules, attacked teamsters. They derailed a train on the track of the Kansas Pacific Railroad. Units of the 7th Cavalry, now this is under Custer, were dispatched to Kansas to punish the dogs, but only caught a quick glimpse of them. The Dog Soldiers, who moved way too fast for the cavalrymen. The dogmen broke camp on the Bison Ridge Republican River and headed for the South Platte River, where they believed they would not be pursued. However, they postponed crossing the greater safety of the far bank. July 11th, 1869, Carr's 5th Cavalry, with 3 companies of Pawnee, led by Captain Luther North, caught up with Tall Bull's Dog Soldier Band as they were camped at Summit Springs, Colorado. Tall Bull was killed during the battle. Carr's command thereafter destroyed the village, so the women and children. The Dog Soldiers, 2 in particular, died in a courageous tradition of these warriors. Little Hawk, a 15-year-old, had a chance to escape. Instead, he held his ground and fought a rear guard action, which allowed many of the Shawnee women and children to escape. It was said of him later that he threw his life away for the people, as a brave man should, when the Pawnee scouts struck him down. Another young dog soldier named Wolf, with plenty of hair, staked himself out with a dog rope in the tradition and in the fashion of the head of the ravine. Fighting around this man was very intense. No one had time to pull the picket pin for Wolf with plenty hair. He was found dead in a place where he had pinioned himself, having not retreated even 1 inch. The Dog Soldiers lost over 60 men at Summit Springs, including a great leader. But more seriously, they never regained their prominence as a separate political division of warriors. Survivors trickled north to the camps of the Northern Cheyenne and the Lakotas, while other Dog Soldiers joined the military force and factions of the South, located South Fork of the Canadian River in the Panhandle region of Texas. These Cheyenne in Texas joined forces with the Kiowas and the Comanches in the Red River War, 1874. In September 1874, Colonel Nelson Miles and 8 companies of the 6th Cavalry, together with Colonel Reynold Mackenzie and 7 troops of the 4th Cavalry, invaded the Panhandle. The commanders launched a brutal war campaign against the Southern Cheyenne, and the Comanche and the Kiowa allies. Persuaded by troops, pursued, and unable to establish a winter camp, these Indians, their ponies, were starved, were unprotected from the cold. By early 1875, the hostile elements of the Southern Cheyenne, including the last remnants of the Dog soldiers, were forced into submission, surrendered to Mackenzie. They agreed to live in exile and peace with the other Southern Cheyenne, the Arapahoes, at Darlington or Cheyenne-Arapaho Reservation in Indian Territory. Now, side note, at the Little Bighorn, it was Crazy Horse, Lakota, who defeated Reno's column. It was the Cheyenne Dog soldiers who led the attack against Custer's column. While the Lakota destroyed Reno, the Dog soldiers decimated Custer. After Crazy Horse and the Lakotas annihilated Reno, they, the Arapaho, joined the Dog soldiers against Custer and exterminated the U.S. 7th Cavalry. Now in the north, the annihilation of George Custer's command at Little Bighorn was the last major triumph for the Lakotas, for the Northern Cheyenne. Retaliation, the Northern Cheyenne were relentlessly pursued by 11 companies of cavalry under Mackenzie, along with his Pawnee and Shoshone scouts. The pursuit ended when they located and leveled an encampment of Dull Knife in the Powder River County, north of Wyoming. The northern Southern Cheyenne were forced into reservations. Several Indian agents asked military societies to keep the peace amongst the Cheyenne. The Dog soldiers were sought out by reservation officials to carry this duty out. Their nature and continued influence posed such a threat that the Dog soldiers reemerged during the reservation period in the 1880s, as a force of opposition to the assimilation programs of the agencies and the officials. At Darlington Agency, the Dog soldiers harnessed and humiliated those who tried to accept this policy of imposing the conqueror's social and economic systems. Now, throughout the Dog soldiers, and though they never approached the power they once had, they remain revered. Stories whispered. Still held in respect today, young Cheyenne are still recruited into this soldier clan. During 20th century, they served as United States military. 2 wars, conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, Persian Gulf, the rise of the Dog soldiers, their determination, the dynamics of change amongst the Cheyenne, their ability to respond to a national crisis. The defeat at Summit Springs ended their prominence as a major force. As Peter Powell said, with the defeat, the power of the Dogmen all but disappeared, blown away like the wind blows the grass, the buffalo grass. The people never forgot the bravery, and it was vowed that they would come back. Well, I have 12 stories for you, told by children who, I'm surprised, know this because they're not all Comanche or Lakota, or maybe the echo of these warriors are so strong. The children who have been taken from their homes and placed in sometimes other homes, sometimes in one of the concentration camps that they call social welfare, have reported in the middle of the night seeing these warriors come, and children have disappeared from locked rooms in the middle of the night and turned up at home, and all the children can say is that the dog soldier brought me. What do you think about them apples? Two Dog, you still with me?
It shows you that it's not over, and it won't be.
No.
It won't be over.
It won't be over. It's not going to be over. And Thursday, I'm going to take this story esoteric. I mean, so esoteric I may bring Gerald with me, because I'm going to tell you how this story relates to the other stories I've told you of the ancient gods, the Queen of Heaven, and the dragons, who Gerald blew my mind saying they called their chief dragon. I'm like, what? So, they've shown up. If it was one story, if it was just Cheyenne, I think his mom or his nana or his daddy told him that story. But the kids aren't waking up in bed to say they saw it. They're waking up at home to say they saw a dog soldier. That blew my mind.
The dog soldier's well known around all of Indian world.
Everyone knows. Everyone knows. So, I brought the strongest warrior I know with me to Dog today. Who's already had a dream. And seeing the full moon in your dream reminds me of the stories of the dog soldiers and when they show up. And the staking of themselves into the sand, saying, I will not go. It was a 15-year-old boy who saved the lives of 200 women and children. 15.
Yes.
So the horrific past of this planet has not finished, obviously. There's indeed
Tracey,
a war. Go ahead.
Let's go a little bit on something else here.
Please.
Okay? Because many times that you've talked to me, you look at Tecumseh and what he tried to do in 1812, the 1810s and 1812s, when he went to all nations.
Yes.
In a time of war, true.
Yes.
To unite the people and
Absolutely.
bring them together. What have I been trying to do?
It's exactly what you're trying to do, and that's why I put the We Shall Remain movie up, and I hope people get a chance to look at it, because when I take this to the next phase Thursday, it won't sound so off the wall. It will actually make sense to you. How all of these stories, we are watching the convergence right now. The actual convergence of revolutions and revelations and rebellions. I saw this passage. And because of things that people are seeing all over the world, so this passage, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth passed away. There was no longer any sea. And I saw a new city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adored for her son. This Queen of Heaven, these dog soldiers, it's absolutely real. And I have pictures.
Oh, undoubtedly real.
The Queen of Heaven may have been a person, but she's also an alignment. An alignment that has not been seen for 7,000 years. That will happen September 23rd, 2017. We're here right now. And there's always in the stories of these times, there are always a dog soldier. And he is always accompanied by the Queen of Heaven. There's always a team. One is a warrior and male. One is a woman. So I brought you on today not telling you. I was about to tell you this. There's an alignment of you and me in the stars. And these two people who band together are always far apart physically, and they are unmarried. Mind-blowing, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Always. Always. So, Thursday, when we talk about this, the wars and rumors of wars, and by the way, there's a couple of really good articles. There's one called "There Indeed Is a War on Cops," and the media's not talking about this war at all. And it's the cops who are coming out saying, there is a problem here. Those are the cops that there's a war on. And a woman who was a good cop, as a matter of fact, just committed suicide. Because it's pretty apparent to me that most people, no matter what they believe, have failed to connect the heaven as we saw it back to the antediluvian peoples of this world who lived in peace. We may not have seen it for that long. The more recently studies of the signs in the stars, there are people who have not made this mistake, and understand its necessity, how you need to be an interpreter right now of prophecy. And the apocalypse, it was written many, many times. Revelation 12, Revelation 21, there are these things being seen. The city in the sky that's being seen all over the world. Yes, that could be Blue Beam, if it was an isolated incident. Somebody sent me a little passage, and I want to read it to you. It says, "Dear sister, the fourth vision in the heavens is taking place in less than 2 years. For the first time, the only time in history, since knowledge has increased, we call this thing the solarium amongst the others. Seriously, knowledge has increased more than you might have realized. Many in the body still don't see it. Through the inspiration, you will be able to see much more in a little while. We do have a little, and we have to do a little with a lot. We are without excuse." And it really struck me. I normally, somebody tells me they got a message from God, I usually think, yeah, has he lost my number again? A-hole. God knows where I am. If he had something to say to me, he'll find me. But with all the things going on, there's finally some talk about the missing children up in Canada, but BC has suddenly lost all the papers of the children who were first taken to these Christian schools to die. They're mysteriously gone before they went from somebody's car, apparently, into the court.
Well, yeah, I can say it like this. For the ones in Memphis, Tennessee that may have these children, you're not that far away from me. I will find out something.
So you know the one I was talking about, eh?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not mentioning certain things, and it's not because I want to be evasive. There are some investigations going on right now that are really horrific. They're horrible things, you know. The residential school documents. There are tens of thousands of these amassed during various stages of the re-education process, where they said they would, if they had to, beat the Indian out of the man. It's the idea of the blank slate. Get them young enough, you can make them into anything. There are some documents that just went available last week at the end of that 2-day official opening, National Research Center for Truth, Reconciliation, University of Manitoba, Winnipeg. They're just a small fraction of the millions of records. Oh, and I wanted to tell people, my friend Tobias will be back on, and he is another dog soldier. It's interesting since he's of the Fox clan. He's going to be on. Check him out, and I really thank you. All listener supported, and we love your help. Thank you so much for joining me, Two Dog. I think I've missed you so much.